Greetings everyone. In today's episode we're going to be implementing a tutorial system. We showed this briefly in the last episode. At the beginning of each level, Rusty will show up to share some tips in the form of speech bubbles. These will range from tips to help you beat the level you're currently playing, or maybe some fun facts about golf or even the game's universe. Each level's tutorial will feature multiple messages and the next button that allows you to move through them. While the tutorial is on screen, we don't want the player to control the ball. In order to handle this, I'm going to define an enum for the game state. In case you don't know, an enum is used for variables which have a limited scope of valid values. A common example could be days of the week or months of the year, but in our case, I want to define two game state values. The intro state, this will be used for the tutorial at the beginning, and the gameplay state, this will be used while the player is allowed to control the ball. I'm going to define a ready method and make sure that we always start in the intro state. And of course, I'm going to need a variable to store the state in, so I'll define an _state variable up above. Then I'm going to take all the code that's responsible for moving the ball or drawing the aim indicator and only execute it while in the gameplay state. I'm going to test my scene now and notice how I no longer have any control over my ball. Good, we're ready to move on. Back in my overlay scene, I'm going to add a margin container to house all my nodes. I'm going to make sure it's a direct child of the overlay node, and I'm going to anchor it to the bottom of the screen. And I'll manually set the height to what I think looks suitable. Next, I'll add a texture rect node and drag Rusty's sprite over it. I'll anchor him to the right and flip him horizontally. Because his sprite is a bit tall, he actually increased the height of the margin container. To fix this, I'll set his expand mode property to be fit width proportional. Then manually drag the container back to where I want it to be. Next, I'll add a panel container. This will be used for the background of the speech bubbles. Notice how it takes up the full width of the screen. I don't want this. To fix it, I'll anchor it to the left and give it a minimal width of, let's say, 800 pixels. I'm going to replace the default texture with a custom one. To do that, I'm going to dig into Theme Overrides, Styles, and create a new Style Box texture. Then I'll drag my custom sprite onto the texture field. Notice how the outline looks a bit weird. I can make it look a bit better by setting the texture margin property of all four sides to 30 pixels. The next component I want is a label, and I'll also give it some placeholder text. I'll give the label the same font we've been using throughout the game. This setting can be found under Theme Overrides and Fonts. I'll drag my custom font onto here. I'll also adjust the font size. I think 32 points looks best. Now to position the label. I'll make it take up the whole width and height of its parent. Then, in the panel container, I'll adjust the content margins a bit to move the label further away from the edges. 40 pixels on each edge looks pretty good. Similar to this, I'll also adjust the margin container's own content margin so the speech bubble and Rusty aren't touching the edge of the screen. It's always a good idea to rename your nodes for better clarity, so I'll do that right now. I want to make the text in the speech bubble appear character by character. To accomplish this, we can use the visible ratio property slider. It's a floating point number that ranges from 0 to 1, where 0 represents no text being rendered and 1 represents all the text being rendered. Just like any property in Godot, it can be animated. So I'm going to add an animation player node and create a new animation called scroll text that will be 2 seconds long. Now I can find the visible ratio property in the inspector and press the little key icon next to it. This will create an animation track for the property. By adding an animation track, Godot will automatically insert a keyframe for me at the playhead. It's at the first frame. I'll set its value to 0. Then I'll manually insert another keyframe at the end and set its value to 1. Now I'll preview my animation. I think it's a bit too slow, so I'll reduce the duration to just 1 second. And I need to drag the last keyframe as well. I think that looks good for now. Before I add more messages to the speech bubble, I'm going to add a way to move between messages. I'm going to add a button node as a child of the text bubble. I'll call it next button and give it some text. Next, in the Theme Override section, I'll assign some themes. I'll assign a default background for the button, as well as a background for when the button is disabled. Notice how the background changes as I toggle the disabled property on and off. I'll assign the same font to the button and give it a font size of 24 points. Next, I'll set the texture margin property to 30 pixels for both styles to make the borders look more visually appealing. I'll anchor the button to the bottom right of its parent container. This probably won't be its final position, but I just want to get it out of the way of the text for now. I really don't like how the button and the speech bubble have the same texture. Also, the button text is a bit hard to read. I'll try to remedy this by modulating the button's normal style a bit. I'll make it slightly darker. However, it's too similar to the disabled button now, so I'll modulate it as well. I'll make it even darker. I'll lighten up the normal style a little bit and move on. I only want the button to be clickable after all the text is visible, so I'll add the button's disabled property to the animation track. The button will start off disabled and will become enabled on the last frame. Notice how when I preview the game that the button has a unique style when I hover over it. Let's assign it a custom style to keep it in line. I'm going to assign it the same texture and margins as before. Finally, for completion's sake, I'll also assign a custom style for when the button is pressed. I'll give it a nice golden color and the same margins as before. Now I'm finally ready to add support for multiple messages in my speech bubble. I'll edit my overlay script and add a new exported variable for the messages. It will be an array of strings. The reason I'm putting it in this script is because it's exposed in all the levels, making it easy to create level-specific messages. Alright, let's create a sequence of custom messages. I'll set the size to 3 elements. The first one will be hello there. Then my name is Rusty. And finally, welcome to my golf course. In order to make it easier to access some of these nodes in my script, I'm going to give them unique names. This is a new feature in Godot 4. I'm going to create a _ready method now. In here, I can refer to my text node's unique name using the % symbol. What I want to do here is to load up the first message from the array instead of the hello world message that we hard-coded before. Check it out. When I start the scene, it says, hello there. Neat, but notice that it's not animated. Let's sort that out next. I'll rename my animation player node and give it a unique name as well. Then, back in the _ready method, I'll play the scroll text animation. Then, if I launch the scene again, we see that the text is now animated. Great. Now let's put the next button to work. I'm going to connect its pressed signal to my overlay script. I'm going to create a new _next message method that will display the next message in the array. But for this to be possible, we're going to need an _message index variable to keep track of where we actually left off. So when we invoke the next message method, we're going to increment the index by 1 and then display and animate the next message. Now let's preview the changes. Okay, we're going through the messages. Naturally, when we run out of messages to display, we get an out of bounds error. To fix this, let's add a guard clause in the next message method. If the current index is greater than or equal to the size of the array, we shall do nothing. Otherwise, do what we did before. If we check out the scene once again, we see that we can get to the end of the sequence, and after that we get nothing. But why settle for nothing when we can play video games instead? So, to bridge the gap between the overlay script and the actual levels it's going to be used in, we're going to make use of Godot's event system. We've used a couple of signals up until now, but now it's time to define our own. At the top of the script, I'm going to define a tutorial complete signal. Then, down in the next message method, I'm going to replace the pass operation with emitting our brand new signal. Emitting a signal doesn't do much on its own. Someone has to actually listen for it. So I'll navigate to my gameplay script, and at the bottom I'll define a new onTutorialComplete handler method which will simply set the game state variable to the gameplay state. Now for the final piece of the puzzle. Up in the ready method, I'm going to connect the tutorialComplete signal so that when it's emitted, we're going to invoke the onTutorialComplete handler. Let's run the scene again and eagerly skip past the messages. And look at that, we've regained control of the game. One minor detail though, those UI elements are kind of in the way. Let's remove them. I'm going to solve this with yet another animation player. This one will have 2 animations, one called show and one called hide. Remember the modulate property from before? Not only does it allow you to change colors, but transparency as well. For the hide animation, I'll change the modulate property from fully opaque to fully transparent. Then for the show animation, I'll do the exact opposite. I'll animate from fully transparent to fully opaque. Let's hook these animations up now. When I emit the tutorial complete signal, I also want to hide the UI. And in the ready method, I want to start by revealing the UI. Let's test the scene one last time. Notice how the UI fades in smoothly. And once I skip past all the messages, it fades away, giving me full control of the game. Fantastic! And that is how we implemented our tutorial system in Rusty's Mini Golf. Whew, that's it for today. Join us next time for the next batch of levels as well as the level selection screen. Make sure to follow us if you want to keep up with development or just for some Godot tips and tricks. Thanks for watching and see you next time.